Hey, this is John, also known as Forrest, Gump 24, Forrest for President, and we're here at a campground in Texas, getting to the West Texas part of our trip where we'll be going through the desert, and this is another Backpacking 101 video for our series. And you can see behind me, still have the tent set up from last night. This week, the topic will be shelters. So there's about 4 shelters that we can think of, and we'll go from lightest weight and most minimal to the biggest sort of shelter that you're going to carry, which is going to be a tent. The first shelter that we'll cover, and it's kind of funny to come across someone that has one of these, bivy shelter, and originally designed probably more as an emergency shelter than anything else, and it's also referred to as a bivy sack, and it's typically just uh, kind of tarp-like light material that goes over you, keeps you out of the elements. They have been getting a little bit more creative with them, and so on the bivvies at the front of them, they might have an arch, whether it's a pole or even seen them inflatable. But this is typically the lightest and most minimal type of shelter that you want, typically carrying it in a scenario for an emergency if you're planning on doing some cowboy camping, or if you're on a trail like the Appalachian Trail and you have these Adirondack shelters that are spaced pretty close together every 5, 15, 20 miles. You could manage to just carry your sleeping pad and maybe a little inflatable pillow if you're like us and like some sleep, and whatever sort of sleep system that you're going to use, whether it's a quilt or a sleeping bag, and then you just have that bivy in your pack as oh no, I didn't get to the shelter sort of situation. Some people like them, but it's a very minimal shelter. It's lightweight. It will keep rain off of you, but you might not be the most comfortable inside of them. The second shelter that we'll cover is called a tarp tent, and this seems to become quite a trend among ultralight backpackers. You're seeing a lot of different designs out there for how these might work, and we've even seen designs where tarp tents are connected to the back of a bicycle tire. But typically, the way that a tarp tent works is, if you're going old school, you just carried the tarp and you found some trees that you had anchor points off of, and you made gave it a pitch that water would rain off of it, um, and set up your stuff underneath of it, and it could be as simple as or as complicated as you were able to attach that tarp to some trees and whatever anchor points you may find. Now they're making tarp tents that look similar to a backpacking tent that you would set up with poles, except underneath of it, you're not going to typically have any bug net or anything, keeping you from the elements. It's just going to be set up with your poles. It's going to give you uh, coverage from the rain. It's going to be very open so that you're going to get a lot of air in there. So that could be, an advantage for the tarp tent. The other thing about a tarp tent is it's going to be very light. They're pretty minimal, just giving you shelter from the rain typically. And then what people will oftentimes do is carry some sort of mat and maybe a ground cloth. They'll put a Tyvek sheet down and then put their pad on top of that and then just slide under it. With the bike, tarp tents also typically need some stakes in the ground to be able to maintain their shape. So you have to keep that in mind. You have to be in a place where you can get stakes into the ground to keep it taut. But with those bikes, the folks flip their bikes upside down. We're able to use the back of the bicycle frame or tire somewhere around there to anchor off of, and then on the back side of their tarp tent where it wasn't open, um, they staked it down to the ground to be able to give it that shape. And tarp tents are used with a lot of ultralight backpackers, used in areas where you're not concerned as much about um, bugs, mosquitoes, no real mosquito netting in those. So, and they're a quick setup and another minimal option for a type of shelter that you might take out on a backpacking trip. The third type of shelter that you might see out people taking on trips is going to be a hammock. And hammock camping it can get pretty specific. Uh, Obviously, with the hammock, you're going to have a certain amount of a bend. So before you go out for a weekend trip or longer, you may want to try and set your hammock up in your backyard and see if you enjoy the feel of sleeping that way. You're going to have to find trees. So that's the deal with hammock. Um, the trees have to be, what I've heard, depending on what types of straps you're taking, 11 feet apart. So look at that. You could hammock right over the water right here. It can be tricky to find a good spot, and then getting the hammock set up the appropriate amount of tautness so that you're in a good shape is also tricky. I've never done the hammock camping, so I can't speak to it personally. I've slept in a hammock a few times, but it wasn't a backpacking hammock, and it was in a situation where I was right by a house, so I could go in if I was uncomfortable. But another thing that you'll find with hammocks is an underquilt is an important part of it. The cold air a lot of times will come from the bottom, so those underquilts can be rather expensive, but it's the idea, kind of like a quilt would be, that people are using with their sleeping pads, maybe down, maybe like a puffy type material, and it goes under the bottom of the hammock. And then if it's a day where the sky looks like this and you're concerned about some rain, then having a tarp, you'll see the hammock set up, and then people will have a tarp over top of it, and that will be connected a little bit higher up on the trees. So hammocks, as far as weight goes, it can be similar to a backpacking tent when it's all said and done, with your underquilt and with your tarp for and sometimes people even have a bug net that goes all the way around it. But it can be a similar amount of weight, and then you got to find that right set of trees that will give you just the right sort of distance so that you can set your straps up and get that nice little bend in there, and it's will be a good night's sleep for you. The final type of shelter that you may consider when you're going on your next backpacking trip is could be a good old-fashioned tent, and there's a variety of those. Tents have been around for a long time. It's what I primarily use, and can get about as good of a night's sleep in that thing as any bed that I'll find. You can see I have my one door open, and that promotes the airflow, which is a good thing unless it's cold out. So as far as tents go, backpacking tents, you want to find something that's light, obviously, and that packs down small. My tent that I have back here, which I'll show you setting up, is Gossamer Gear the One, and that is 22-ounce tent. You can see that it pitches with some hiking poles, so you've got a pole on each side, and then it is attached to the ground at 6 points to be able to keep it upright. That would be called a tent that is not freestanding. You set it up with your poles. Since I'm backpacking, well, right now I'm not, but when I take it out, since I'm backpacking, I have the poles with me. So you're using the poles for two different things. At night, the only thing that you might use a pole for if you had a freestanding tent is to try and get those mice or vermin away from your food bag, but you don't need the poles at night, so um, it's a second use for them, and they don't cause you to carry any extra weight. This tent in particular, it packs down to a really small bag, and then just has 6 stakes, and you can go with different types of stakes. The other tents that you will see, other than one that sets up with your hiking poles, is a freestanding tent. So they'll have some poles with them, and they typically cost a little bit more than the tents that you set up with your poles. If you get a good freestanding tent, there are some affordable ones out there, and you can go to, a place like a big box store and get a tent for under $100 if you really wanted to. This particular tent is retailing from Customer Gear at $300. I got it when it was 30% off, so it was closer to 200, and I've used it for a while. Very good. Uh, as far as trail weight goes, you may have a little bit more weight with a tent. It just depends on how much you want to spend, but that thing's got that bug net in there, which is built right into it. It's can withstand rain pretty well. This morning, this ground is really hard, and for the first time on this trip so far, which I think is 84 days, one of the stakes flew out and it was trying to fall over on me while I was getting up this morning. But yeah, it's a really great tent. A lot of the tents will talk about a bathtub floor, which just really means that the sides of the tent come up a little bit, which I guess is a positive thing in terms of rain, but to me it sounds more like a marketing ploy. Um, you really don't want any water getting into any tent that you have. If you have that problem, then it might be time to think about getting a new tent. But I have it kind of on either side of it, pulled out so that I get a little bit more room for my feet and for my head, because in this particular trip in the south part of the country, especially Florida through Louisiana, a lot of humidity, a lot of moisture. But you can see back there that I'm by a river to um, tonight last night, and this is a single wall tent, meaning that it doesn't have a separation between the body of the tent and the mesh and then the rain fly. There's no rain fly on this thing. One of the knocks on single wall tents is that they can get moisture pretty easily, and if you're around a body of water, it's definitely recommended to try and vent it as much as possible, which you can see I have the door open. But ever since I've been here in Texas, I haven't really woken up at all to any sort of condensation. And even if condensation is on the tent walls, which will happen, it's definitely something to consider when getting a single wall tent. The single wall allows it to typically be lighter and pack up smaller, but the condensation only really ever bothers you if you're touching the walls of the tent. So you can see, like I said, I have it pulled out a little bit on each side to give me a little extra space. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to go pull it down a little bit and show you how you would set up one of these tents, in case you never saw a tent set up with some trekking poles. When you're out ready to set up camp, finding a flat spot is really the trick to it all. They're not prevalent in the woods, oftentimes only at designated camping areas where you find a really flat spot. But you'll notice throughout the whole night, shifting from one side of the tent to the other, up or down, depending on where the slope is. it can really mess up a good night's sleep by not having a flat spot. And you can of course adjust, and depending on how tired you are, you'll be just fine. But the first step is always to find a flat spot. But with a single wall backpacking tent like this one, what you can see is that we're staked at 4 places, and that's really going to give us the ability to put these poles in and get it upright. So it's not like your old tent where the poles cross at the top and it just stands up by itself. No, you need these uh, stakes in the corner. So what I did first was I put these stakes here down in the um, ground, and you want to have it taut both lengthwise and widthwise here. So not super tight, but taut. And then I always do the back side of the tent here. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm pulling up the back side. I'm going to see if I can get my trekking pole underneath here. So you can see here that there's a little actual pocket that the pole will connect under, and then at the bottom there's a grommet that you can put the kind of pole's tip in, and so that will hold the bottom of the, and now this will be fun doing it in the wind with one hand. So it will help you see that it's not a problem to set these things up. If you can do it with one hand in the wind. Find my stakes, and so this ground is hard, but after you get it staked down, you let it set for about 10 minutes, so it just kind of eases, and then you'll tighten it up. You can see that all of the sides have these strings to tighten it down, and so I got the stake in there, and this is one side of the tent, and then basically you just come to the other side. So you can see what's happening is, instead of 10 poles that came with the tent, I'm using my trekking poles to get this upright. Under there. Let's see if I can show you the grommet. The grommet is down here, and it's not completely necessary because my poles, and depending on what your poles look like on the bottom, it may or may not fit in there. Mine are kind of rounded from clicking them on the ground too often, but so then you just want to pull this out like this. Grab me my last stake. Just oops. So that's kind of in there, but got a little bit of a funny shape to our tent, and if this stake was in a little bit more secure, I can now just tighten this up. And you want to, after you set the tent up, you want to let it rest a little bit. When you have trekking poles, a single wall tent like this, and then you just go around and you tighten them all down, and you got a nice shelter, plenty of space in here. It's got the bug netting, and you can see laying down, I have plenty of space for my head, plenty of space for my feet, and then you got all this area to put all the rest of your stuff. So this is backpacking 101. We're talking about shelters here, and this is a single wall backpacking tent set up with trekking poles, and is a good option for your next backpacking trip. Other options that you have, bivy. Bivvies are pretty small, maybe not the most comfortable thing in the world, used in emergencies for some, but the real crazy ultralight people will carry those. And you have tarp tents, which again is pretty minimal. You'll be exposed to the elements, but you'll have nice airflow, and it will be a very lightweight setup. You got hammocks, and that will require finding a good set of trees to set up. And then you got a variety of backpacking tents. So hope this makes you want to get that tent out of the closet and go set it up in the backyard, and see how it feels to get a little fresh air. But hopefully you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you out there.